See if I can do this on the ground.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are live. Welcome to the first episode of This Kind of Style. I'm here with my guest, Andreas Exertus. What's happening, brother?
Hey, how are you doing? Good to see you.
If you don't know Andreas, he's been doing carbon nanotube. Well, you've been working on graphene for over a decade. You're actually the guy that I think introduced me to it, or at least was the first person that I ever knew that knew anything about it and made it like on a. You were like, how were you doing that on the CD? You were working with like a CD burner,
right? Yeah. So there's a lot of different things you could do to just like make graphene. At the time was just to burn carbon. But so what we were trying to do is like, how can you burn carbon into a way that's useful? So if you took really thin, really refined graphite, and then you were to bake it onto the top of a disc, and then you used a laser, the same way they use disc label burners, like they had these things that would burn the top of the disc labeler. So we could put that into a disc labeler and it would print the pattern you wanted it would burn it into the carbon. So then you'd have a perfect single atom thick layer of graphene, and it could be whatever you wanted it to be. So it could be a photovoltaic cell, or it could be in the shape of a semiconductor. You could use it to calculate. So, I mean, it's interesting because as soon as you open up how you can chain carbon together, that's where it gets really interesting. You know, it's actually not that hard to burn carbon into graphene, or to chemically burn it even.
So you were like painting carbon ink? What was it exactly you were putting on the disc?
Yeah, so you make a super thick solution of graphite. So super refined graphite. So it's a kind of carbon. So carbon's like, this is like these words like allotrope is where I was going to bring up. Like at some point, we think of like ice and water and gas as different states of matter, but really there's also allotropes of carbon. You can think of diamond, or you could think of a pencil. The graphite could be structured in different ways. So you can get it down to just one atom thick. And then that's pretty much what we refer to when we're talking about graphene or nanotubes, or, you know, different kinds of these things are just super thin. But when they're chained a certain way, that's where it becomes really interesting. So when you burn it, it burns it at a direction. So with a laser, you can burn it so there's just one pattern that's repeating, or it can bend in a certain direction. So you're able to actually have the same thing that you have with a circuit board. There's a labyrinth where energy can flow in a certain direction. And because the way the surface area of graphene, it pushes energy into one vacuum.
Were you actually able to make like legitimate graphene with a CD burner?
Totally.
It was carving the graphite into graphene?
But we weren't using a CD burner. We're using the disc labeler. So it's a laser, but what it is the software labeling system where you could burn a picture onto the top of a disc in the 90s and late 2000s.
And you were making the picture of a circuit?
Yeah, exactly. So you just print like a 386 or some of the more rudimentary ARM processor right onto the carbon. And so you start with a liquid that's kind of a thick liquid of graphite, of carbon, but then it's baked. So you vacuum bake it onto the top of a disc, and then you put that disc into the disc burning, labeler, and burn the pattern onto the top of it. And we used Nero, like the disc burning software. Nero had a disc label printer aspect to it, I guess. So we used that as the tool, and then we just implemented it with Promoter. It was what's it called? SemiCAD, or whatever kind of the CAD sequencer is for writing solid state physics for a processor. And then we just used the processor design that was from the i386. So it was based on the IBM i386, but then we just printed it. And it at that scale, it's interesting because usually the i386 processor, the big thing about it is they just made it smaller and smaller and smaller. But the easiest way to make something smaller, well, either you burn it with a laser or you grow it. At a certain point, if you can grow it with crystals, that would be better. But we're not doing that yet. We're just cutting it down.
Are you using the crystals to like provide some sort of sympathetic resonance to the carbon?
So
grow, or does the crystals themselves grow and the carbon is attached?
So that's a whole other thing, which is like I'm more interested in, to be honest. And Donald, and so
Donald Albert,
yeah,
chemist.
We worked on chemical systems to grow graphene, and Wiley Schultz is another person I would mention who worked on this too. Memorizing chemical reactions like football plays, just trying to figure out like, what's the Tchaikovsky reaction? What happens when this happens? Like there's dharmic consequences in chemistry. So you can kind of predict what's going to happen if you set up carbon in such a certain way and it's in a vacuum. And there's a bunch of like machines that already exist. The other thing is trying to avoid inventing new machines. Like there's so many things, they're so expensive, but if you already can use a pre-existing fab process, we talked about using sputtering, because if you use a sputtering technology, then you can very thinly apply something as it's spinning rapidly, and you can have a thin film. And then after that, you can burn it. But the idea of growing with crystals is you could have crystal lattices, and crystals don't have to be super strong, right? You could have thin salts. And this is another thing that's interesting about crystal. Okay, so really we're talking about ceramics. And nobody thinks about this, but there's 3 different kinds of ceramics. Like there's mineral ceramics, there's ionized ceramics, and there's salt ceramics. So like salts involve crystal. There's a lot of crystal ceramic lattices that build, and then they allow for the accumulation of mineral. And so minerals start to form around salt ceramics. And anything that's electric, any sort of ionization causes ionized ceramics or ionized ceramification. So when we think about metals, when we think about salts, when we think about carbon, we're really thinking about kinds of nano properties that are involved with ceramics. And it changes the way we work with this material, because the material itself, it has different properties at different sizes. That's the main thing when you use nanotechnology, is the surface area is greater than the volume. There's a number of qualities that you don't expect, because you're like, well, if this was a big thing, it would do this. But because it's so small, it doesn't have the volume to cause the density, to cause the electromagnetic reaction, or all of these principles that we're used to dealing with. So I don't know if that answered your question, but basically, yeah, when you're growing something with crystals, like you're trying to figure out the chain reactions that will cause it.
And are you also then making like a crystalline salt lattice that you can wash away and you're left over with the graphene that was attached to it or something?
I mean, so again, that it also depends on what you want. If you want pure graphene, that's a way to do it. Not everyone wants pure graphene. A lot of the time, graphene is really useful because of how it can hold on to chemicals, and like you can tailor chemical reactions that happen at a surface layer level with the most precision, like very chemicals that cause very specific reactions. And this is very similar to biology. At a certain point, you're dealing with something like a protein fold, where it's causing this to have this reaction, and you can predict that. So we get to a point of biomimicry, and it's not that you necessarily want to get rid of the crystal, right? Because diamond is a kind of crystalline carbon. It's a perfect allotrope. It's actually a better allotrope than graphene. But graphene is really it's practical because it can be broken apart. It can be held together as long as you want it to. It can be used as scaffolding the same way that a crystal can be used for scaffolding, right? You could use graphene to grow a crystal the same way. And that's really practical because you have a bunch of synthetic crystals. Like the more synthetic crystals we have, the cheaper they are, but the more practical uses we can find for these kinds of crystals. And that's, I think a lot of people think it's really woo, that you're interested in crystals, but it's also what every technology is built based on, right? We're not able to have this conversation without crystals.
This is a crystal behind me. This is a quartz crystal crushed in a lab. Would you consider it synthetic because it was made in a laboratory?
Synthesis is a really philosophical concept to me. I don't know. I mean, are we synthetic, or are we a natural process? Are we just the most symmetrical reaction of physics? This might just be what makes the most sense. But I mean, in terms of having control over what you produce, like, I mean, that's interesting. If we're skiing, and while we're skiing down the hill, you're able to make tricks, you have a certain mobility of choice, then yeah, I think it's really cool that we're able to make crystal. We have a purification process to get exactly the intention we want out of something that's growing, that's a fractal, and it's following its own, it's the same, it's a clone of itself, right? Like there's something about that that's really interesting. And a lot of crystals are not perfect in nature, which is cool because that teaches us a lot. But
well, I just want to say to everyone that's watching, thanks for coming. The stream's just getting started. Throw in your super chats, and I'm going to read them at the end. And this is Andreas Exertus. If you haven't seen his work, Exertus, let's get it straight. Subscribe to Andreas Exertus on YouTube. We've been working together for a long time on graphene and other materials and things like that. Material science fascinates me, especially like cermets. I think you're the one that introduced me to cermets. The idea. Can you explain what a cermet is?
Well, I mean, so in relation to what, like, remind me also, like,
So much
what
like
you mean.
nanomaterials. I think you're explaining the different types of nanomaterials, and it's like they're super resistant to high heat. I think they're ceramic and metal.
Right. So when we were talking earlier just about like the three different kinds of ceramics, like if you think about mineral based ceramics, most of the metal cermets are mineral based ceramics, and you can use them for essentially the same. Like the alternative is a glassy ceramic in a lot of the respects. So a metal ceramic is actually something that will bond itself as it starts to heat or as it starts to have chemical reactions. It can start to grow more bonds, and the metal itself can pull like through electron acquisition. It can actually create more metal. Like it grows metal the same way that crystals grow. So you can have, it's really, cermets can be found in like ancient Rome when they make concretes, because they're combining certain materials that when they have chemical reactions with the lime, they actually hold together in stronger ways. They're useful if you want to produce like a resonance or some, even if you want insulation material, but you can use it in antenna. Like there's a reason why people think that the pyramids could have been used for antenna or transceiver material. It's because of the cermet quality, like the fact that you have quartz crystal and you have metals in the stone that are able to produce bipolarity. I mean, the other thing that's interesting though on a nano scale property is that it can be used to direct energy in really small subtle ways. So even light, we've used it for spacers, right? You can use this to absorb and to have a certain amount of the word we just used earlier. I'm sorry for
cermets. Oh no, you're saying
no,
something else.
for when you're a material that is like reducing energy. There's conducer
That's a
trans.
cool word.
I forget
You'll
now.
remember.
Basically, the material that's keeping, like if you have a wire and it's covered in this material.
Yeah, like a
Um,
not a resistor, but yeah, like the rubber on the soles of your shoes.
Insulation. So like
Yep.
so insulating the energy then allows it to be put into a direct channel, but because there's such a small amount of energy and there's so little area that it can go, you can direct it with almost no entropy. So spacers also can kind of produce seem to produce, because of the more energy that's flowing in such a small place without energy being lost, this produces a larger energy field, because the amount of this space that energy is traveling through actually accumulates more energy, even though it's a small path. So you have more electrons that are like a bead that are going, and eventually it just becomes a field. So an energy field builds. So there's benefit to that for electricity and for,
What,
radio.
what is a spacer?
So spacer is like a random laser. Like it's a nano laser that can change directions. This is kind of confusing basically because it's not really changing directions. It's really just going straight, but the area around it's changing, and it's happening at certain degrees. So it doesn't really have to be one direction or another direction. Also, because of photonics, light can, you can have a spectrum of light that's going through one direction. You can have 240 nanometers of light that's going another direction. So you can actually have photonics that break up the data of light in a spacer. Lasers can also be used to refract data back and forth at the same time. You might have 240 coming at you while you're sending out 160 or 460. So you can have cross channels of light that are invisible to each other. It's in the same path, going both directions at once, right?
I was just thinking about the value of interference at that scale. I kind of want to ask some more general stuff, and particularly about graphene. So it's
Sure.
been a while, man. I haven't talked to you in a while, but let's get down to it. Like, what are some of the new uses for this stuff, graphene? Well, first of all, can you really quickly explain it, what it is, and then maybe what is it used for?
Yeah, I mean, so what I found interesting about graphene as a kid, or like, when I first started going to school for nanotechnology, is like you've got this chain link fence. If you lay it sideways, you can't see it, but if you put it upwards, then you've got this perfect chain link fence, which is like hard to cross and everything. It's a perfect netting of carbon. It's not as perfect as a diamond, because a diamond's netted in three-dimensional space, but it's perfect in the sense that you can not pull it apart. So at its atomic level, you're using as little material as possible, in order to make the strongest structure that you can find. And if you start looking with a SEM, like a scanning electron microscope, at sand on the beach, you'll see, wow, there's all kinds of these shapes that exist in nature, like tiny little seashells that are perfect, and nautilus and all this. But there are certain kinds of things in their structure a lot of the time that they're allotropically similar to graphene. So graphene seems to be a thing that produces itself naturally. And it's also something that is, you can look up a picture of the arabesques in like a Muslim temple, and you'll see really similar patterns, like these ideas of stars that are tied together, the chain link that work really well. Some of the cool uses, even early on, you're like, wow, if you have something that energy can flow through, then that means you can store more energy in that, like we were saying. So you can make a battery that is better battery. And right now there's a lot of these ideas of having scaffolding of graphene to hold tiny nanoscopic particles of ionized salt from former nuclear radioactive nuclear generators. Like they take the salt, the molten salt, and then that salt will generate electricity over the next 10,000 years or 150, depending on how they do it. So if it's held in a small amount, then it can be used in a battery.
You actually catch the salts in a graphene or in like a carbon netting. And
right.
then is it that the salt causes some sort of vibration in the netting, which produces electrical current?
So the way it was explained to me is sort of like mouse traps with a ping pong ball, and then it bangs and it starts popping mouse traps off, and that goes for a little while, but then it's caught and it uses that energy up, and then you do it again, right? And you do this in such a way that it keeps it from all happening at once. It has a slow fission as opposed to a very quick fusion state, which can cause an explosion, right? So this would be something also with insulation that can keep radiation inside of this container. You can have these batteries probably in your hand or even in your car. And this is technology NASA has just come out with, we've talked about this before a few years ago, but now it's become more relevant. The other thing that was interesting though is supercapacitors, right? Because batteries or whatever, like a supercapacitor is a far more interesting idea because you have a labyrinth of electricity that's very instantly charged in a capacitor is used in your like photo camera. When you like click that button and it charges up the flash, has to get a lot of electricity really quickly. So it stores it up and then uses it. But if you could do that properly, like if you covered an entire plane or a car in a paint job that's lasered with a labyrinth, so that the energy could be stored, and also using the correct material for piezoelectric photovoltaics. So the electricity from the light hits the labyrinth on the photovoltaic cell. The entire car fills with light in a few minutes or less. The entire thing is charged and it dissipates rather quickly, but it's filled as quickly as it's dissipated. So you would never really have to charge it per se. It's always charging and it doesn't break down. Right. So that's a better system. I mean, carbon can be erased like a pencil, but it can be protected as well with all sorts of other thin films and hydrophobic materials. So you could have a material that was a perfect supercapacitor. I think that's one of the more interesting ones. And that supercapacitor could also absorb energy. It could refract energy. So you could have OLED televisions that are made out of graphene. You could paint a building and it be an OLED television. It also has touch reaction to a degree that's thousands of times more than anything that we've ever experienced. So it can actually feel the difference between hydrogen and like oxygen. Like it would be able to, if you painted a plane, it would have a touch sensor, the entire body, that would be able to feel the difference in heat, feel the difference in humidity, it would know the kinds of senses that this thing can produce just with carbon while charging itself, while being invisible, because it's a OLED TV. I mean, the kind of technology is great.
Would it be just because it's in the hexagonal lattice, it is a supercapacitor, or do you need to do something else to it?
So the way energy flows, right? It has to be, so really it's not enough that it's just producing carbon. It has to be burned and scored in such a way that it's causing a path. And so there's a path that it's being followed. And that's what's, solid state physicists really work on this idea. What's the shortest path between 2 points? How many points can we put out? That's how you produce these like Solomonic looking patterns that are circuit boards. Cause they're really trying to figure out, like, should we use a radial? Should we use a square? And this technology, should it go upside down? It's not very different than the postmen in the 16th to the 19th century who were called circuit writers, right? Because they had to design the circuits for how information would go around a city. And we kind of adapted that technology for circuits.
So you'd take you'd draw the circuitry in graphene on the side of an airplane, and then would it matter what the airplane was made of?
I mean, everything matters, but it's like it wouldn't really matter. So, there's other things that matter. Electricity right now, the Airbus 320 is made with a thin film of copper, so that if it's hit by electricity, by lightning, then the copper will absorb the electricity and keep the plane safe. But it's also no longer made out of aluminum. It's made out of carbon. And I think the reason for the carbon fiber is it's stronger, lighter. It has graphene-like properties that are put into the resin. It can hold 10% more oxygen or 20% more oxygen, so you don't get the headache in the A320. It's a really great plane. But the problem was it was not safe if it got hit by lightning. So the copper was a solution to absorb, that energy. There's a number of solutions that they can come up with like that as well.
I want to make sure this is my first time using Streamlabs. Shout out to Streamlabs, great software. Or I'm sorry, not Streamlabs, StreamYard. Also great software, but StreamYard, great streaming service. And I've got a chat on the side, on the right side. I see super chats coming in, and can you confirm that the entire chat will be there for later in the show if I go back?
Yeah. Great. So what should happen is StreamYard should store these in the starred area. So you have 3 that are stored in the starred, and then you should be able to find them by going there.
Also,
if you click on them, then they demonstrate on the screen.
Great. Let's do this one just for fun.
Hello.
Calix. Good to see you. All right. Yeah, we'll check out some more of those later. Thanks, man. Everybody like the video and subscribe to the channel if you like what you're seeing so far. I'm going to be doing a lot more of these interviews. Let's continue the hotness. So you're talking about obviously the superconductive capacity, the super capacitive, I guess it's not just so you're saying it's not just graphene. Is it the what is it, the benzene rings? That's the hexagonal ring. Is it that makes the energy? So is it the carbon?
So there's a bunch of things, but really what it is the structure, right? So it's not that it's carbon. Carbon's really easy to work with, but it's the structure. It's the allotrope. So it's a number of things. It's the high surface area. It's the tailored surface chemistry. It's the added to bulk composite materials properties. When you add this to something else, what happens to that material? It's the fact that it is more than we understand. It's metal. It's ceramic, it's polymer, right? And it's also that it can exist in a powder-like state, a fluid-like state. So it exists in multiple states because of how small it is. We don't even really think about what nanoparticles are. But I mean, again, it's structure. So it's one of the reasons I was so interested in graphene is its geometry, and you can see in nature these repeating patterns. And what we're really doing is we're just trying to figure out how to use these repeating patterns in a smaller way. I mean, if you're really into recycling and environmentalism, the first thing you should want to do is use as little material as possible, right? Because there's so many people using material. So nanotechnology seems like a logical way to do this because you could build a house in a geodesic dome, right? It's all about structure more than it's about anything else.
And that's just because it's at the nano scale.
I mean, yeah, everything has a different quality to different size, but the nanoscale is, again, because let's imagine you've got like an earth or something, a golf ball, let's do it. The smaller it is, you've got more surface and you have less core, right? You have less volume. So it changes. So that's the point when it really changes what it is.
So can it get to a point where there is only surface and there is no core? Or
that's arguably what so you get like quantum wells, then quantum dots, quantum strings, quantum wires. That's kind of where a quantum well is, that idea of something that's like 10,000 angstroms. When you get below that, yes, like I think arguably the argument is that beyond nanotechnology, beyond 10,000 angstroms, or rather within 10,000 angstroms, you're dealing with femto technology or femto scale. And the femto perspective would be flat, I think, and that's really interesting because that's where you get to like meta, beyond physics, or quantum meta is the say, then you're dealing with I mean, then it's even more logical to study nanotechnology, because we're trying to figure out the structures, and structures we're believing probably have principles that we can find. Like the fact that you see something really large in the macrocosm that seems really similar to something in the microcosm means that we probably will find similar patterns in the femtoscale. But we don't really know. The thing that would be interesting about that is like to be able to print at a femtoscale technology, you'd basically need a star, and you'd be able to print the magnetic spin state, the actual ionization process. So really, you'd be able to copy this moment and print another moment. Like you'd be able to print this world with the same chain reactions going on. Like you could start it from this conversation, and it would just be able to keep going at that femtoscale.
Yeah, because at some scale, shape decides what it is materially. Like hydrogen is only hydrogen because of the shape of the hydrogen. And so if you can change the shape at that level, then it would be helium instead by
And
adding.
density, right? The atomic mass. But there's also like the question is are there qualities? Because carbon seems social, right? Carbon seems like a very social thing. I'm saying that nicely. Like carbon really is a flirt. It likes to interact with other particles. And there's some, you could say helium is isn't the same, but helium finds itself over and over again. It renews its like sense of purpose and identity when it starts to, these scales of helium. So I don't know. I think that there are natural attributes to what we're describing when we say carbon that are more than just the mathematical cold idea of carbon, because it's interesting. It's a thing that we're able to be built out of, and we can make the world out of. Yet really it's just this malleable concept. I mean, it's not that different than gold. And we do make nano structures later after you've made it out of carbon. A thing to do is to make gold graphene, to make gold nanotubes, right? You do it, but it's less important, because unless you're doing it for the purpose of using gold and gold having some sort of potential quality, maybe in terms of being used as a conductive material, but we're finding conductive qualities in carbon itself. So it's like, really, we just need to figure out what things do, when they're put in circumstances. I think that's the thing. We're just trial and testing.
Do you know off the top of your head what the melting point of carbon is?
So that's another interesting idea. Like density will change melting points. So carbon, if you think about atoms that are further separated from each other, then the idea of what temperature will cause that, what amount of radiation causes them to be further separated, becomes kind of a moot point, right? So if you're talking about like nanocarbon, it's not very different than like any temperature change will change the quality of the allotrope. But if you're talking about like a denser carbon, I think it's really hot. I think it's in like 700 degrees or something like that.
At what point does something become nano?
Hold on, I want to look that up really quickly
Yeah,
to
let's
make sure I
find
don't.
out.
So
Because
280, it says no, that's LED. Sorry.
Bring it on. You can
I
also
think
put it in the staging area too if you want.
it's like 327 or something.
327
like that.
degrees.
Yeah, in centigrade. But then also graphene, they say 4,510 Kelvin, which is equivalent to 8,359.33. So at that point, if you're talking about the structural integrity, once you get it to a point that's perfectly structurally integral, then no matter what amount of pressure and heat and things pulling at it, it can withstand that up to something like 9,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So
That's
it's
excellent.
really, yeah, like it's really cool. Like you can make something that it can be, it's almost like the mercury, the liquid silver of structure, right?
So when does something become nano? How big?
So nano in terms of is when you're able to deal with it at an atomic scale. So you could consider yourself like at an atomic scale. It just would be really complicated. So for the most part, people like to consider things at an atomic scale within 10,000 angstroms to a million angstroms. And so angstroms, if you're talking about one atom to 10,000 atoms tall, right? Or maybe a million atoms tall. Beyond that, you start to try to think about micro, and things that are larger. But nano just has to do with being able to measure in atoms, really.
Okay, so one one atom, like, so you said how many, like 1 nanometer would be how
So
many atoms thick?
So a nanometer is like 10,000 angstroms, right? So 10 to the negative 10th of a meter is an angstrom. So a nanometer is what? 0.1 angstrom, right? Or yeah, 0.1 angstrom. So you could say, okay, so then according to Wiki, like a billionth short scale of a meter, so 1 billionth of a meter
Is
is
it
where
an angstrom
is a
or is it
nanometer.
nanometer? Oh, cool. One
Yeah.
billionth of a meter.
Yeah,
Awesome.
but then so like again, nanometer is like, you would go early, you would want to use angstroms because you want to go like that would be like the mile is a nanometer, and you'd really be wanting to use like the foot or the inch, so you'd be using angstroms more in nanoscale.
I'm interested if you've heard about twistronic graphene.
Yeah, but
Tronics in general.
you brought up twistronics recently, right? There was something that
Yeah,
you'd looked up.
I want to read a little bit about it here. Twistronics are pretty fast. Oh, here, I got to pull this up. I'm going to present the screen pretty quick. And let's do that here, here. This is pretty fun. And
Yeah.
here. Twistronics are basically when you take a layer of graphene or a layer of anything and then lay it on top of another layer at an angle. And like you get an angle of like 1 degree is particularly here, 1.1 degree rotation at sufficiently low temperatures, electrons move from one layer to the other. And I think they figured out how to do this. They called it the magic angle could have been, I think, with graphene. Maybe wrong about that, but they find this magic angle that creates a lattice and the phenomenon of superconductivity. So whereas like one layer of graphene maybe is a capacitor, maybe not a superconductor, if you lay another layer on top of it at 1.1 degrees, it starts to gain superconductivity. And then they figured out that you can lay multiple layers on top of each other. I don't know if they're all at 1.1 degree, but it creates better and better conductivity. And I wonder if there's going to be some, this is just like an idea, but like some relation to the star, the 64 tetrahedron on like a two-dimensional plane where you see that star. Let me see if I can pull up that thing. 64 tetrahedron. In the future, I think I'll have these slides already loaded so I can just pull them up as we're talking about it. But like
For the first time on StreamYard, you're doing good.
Yeah, this is looking good so far. So you've got something like this biatch right here. Let me see if I can now pull this one up. Present the next screen, motherfucker.
I also sent you, I think, on Spintronics before we leave the subject of all, but yeah.
Oh, that's good. What did you send me?
It's just in terms of, it just has to do with the magnetic processes, like electromagnetism to produce twistronics. It's pretty interesting. But start with this. So this is what I believe in right here.
Yeah, this is like multiple. So if you imagine like this is a layer, like this is a flat layer, like this could be a layer. And then on top of it's another layer, like this is a layer. And all these layers laid on top of each other to produce what looks like this. This could be like six pieces or something. And carbon is C6, and then there's hexagonal shape is 6 pieces. So maybe 6 layers of graphene on top of each other. And I'm thinking that it will create a wire. Like if you're looking down the tube of a wire and the wire is this shape, and you're like, that's the energy is going forward through that it could conduct and capacitate lightning or like really, really high levels of electricity and heat. I wonder and then there's this thing called turbostratic graphene we've talked about before, where you're actually out of air or out of materials, you're able to create wafers of graphene, just flat wafers of it. And I'm wondering if you could set up a printer where you actually print wafers of graphene on top of each other in a twistronic fashion to like really rapidly create like long wires of.
So here's the difference. So what I would look up for like the difference between twistronics and stereolithography. So stereolithography is what they do to produce a lot of the semiconductors on silicon wafers. And it's a form of chemical printing that's based on what they did for filmmaking. In film, you have certain lights cause certain chemical burns to the certain chemicals in the layer. So you have 7 layers of perforation, like red, green, blue, and you've got in between that cyan, magenta, ultraviolet, and a chromium kind of silver. But the point is that there's silver in between that instead of carbon in a film on a thin film, and then the light that shines because of the different the different spectrum that burns the chemical. And they do the same thing to make a semiconductor. They'll take a photograph, essentially, right, which is like these layers. It will burn the chemical. It will cause a certain chemical to rise. It will cause this other chemical to wash. Another chemical will then be placed on top, and they'll do this at least 7 times. It's probably more like hundreds of times. But that's how they grow, by burning and then washing and the different chemicals into a pattern. The difference with stereolithography from Twistronics or spintronics is that those are different materials, or those are different chemical reactions because of the light. They're not necessarily chemical reactions where the material itself is growing at a different scale, a new allotrope. And so that would be like if you were growing like pencil lead and all of a sudden it grew to diamond. Like there's a way crystals grow. Crystals just kind of grow the way they are. Like if you put a crystal in like if you took a salt crystal and you put it in salt water, it will grow more salt crystal, but it will grow the same shape. It will just continue to grow lattices. So in order to cause that salt crystal to grow a new shape, to use Twistronics, you would be able to cause that salt crystal to grow in new directions, to cause new lattices to have different shape, and then to do it again, and to just all of a sudden switch it again. And it's a compatible technology, but it's not the same as stereolithography. I mean, that's where I think spintronics steps in, is because while you're doing that, then you can have harmonics. Like they're using sound to cause spintronics, right? Like they're using different frequencies to do this now. And it's like there's a lot of really interesting simple ways to cause a new crystal grow, but they're not often used, because by the time that you think to do that, you've already spent $100 billion building a stereolithography plant, which is why Intel is kind of falling behind, by the way, because like they don't want to take that experiment.
Oh, is that how they're making circuits, Intel?
So Intel makes semiconductors, and what they do is like they started with the i386 design, and then Moore's law is just like every year you make it half the size, like you have double the resolution of last year, right? And so that way, if you have it half the size, you can have double the amount of chip, right? Because like in the same wafer, you can have double the amount of chip, and they got really good at producing that pattern over and over again. But it's just one pattern, and it doesn't allow them to go smaller. And something that you'd brought up earlier when you're talking about spacers is like when energy is flowing that close to something else, that's where Moore's law was predicted to hit a problem, was that you can have energy error, because if you're supposed to be running a calculation that's dependent on a crystal clock, and it's getting light from other crystal clock, you get damage. You damage your order of operations, so it can ruin your math. And I think that's why Intel's kind of failing, and AMD is just making arrays of mosaics of chips.
So using spintronics, you think you could actually make like, what was it that they're doing? That
you would be able to produce different angles of crystal growth. So you'd be able to actually grow these things instead of just having chemical reactions where the light causes this layer to solidify and this layer to wash away, and you keep growing it on top of it. So you'd be able to actually start growing, change the direction, cause new lattices to grow, change that direction, stop it, and build these natural structures. So you'd have to imagine the difference between like a city and a wicker wild natural world. Like instead of these chips being chiseled like a city, these chips would be grown from the atomic scale. They would be grown from the smallest scale possible, and it would make it possible for energy to go directly with insulation without any entropy in ways that we just can't do right now.
And so you saying you bombard it with sound and maybe hit it with a pulse of sound or a rapid pulsation of sound to cause it to like break and appear in a new position and grow, and then you pulse it again and it appears in a new position really rapidly?
Right. So there's a bunch of ways. One way is that they deal with just hyper electromagnetic force. Another way is with sound, where they find the harmonic. Was it the harmonic signature harmonic frequency of the crystal? It's the same thing if you like flick a glass and you hear that tone, and then you play that tone back recorded at the glass, and you can cause the glass to shatter because you're playing this. It's like you can do things like that, and you
Harmonic
can even
resonance, is that what it's called?
yeah, it's like signature harmonic resonant frequency. I think it's like because there's a signature frequency that something's held at, and you can do that in other ways that aren't just so destructive too. Like you can have two frequencies that are binaural in order to acclimate something to another frequency. There's a bunch of different things you can do with that, but sound is a really cheap, easy way to cause spintronic functions and reactions.
Yeah, when looking at shapes, you know, the cymatics you've seen. Let's see if I can pull up actually
Yeah,
cymatics
like
in
or like
action.
Notre Dame. I always believe that the windows of those stained glass windows are cymatic patterns because those organs are tuned to play the same tones as those patterns that are produced in the windows. I'm pretty sure that cymatic patterns are a natural law.
I think cymatics, when you're looking at cymatics, this is like all caused by vibration, these shapes. And then you're looking primarily at two-dimensional planes here. But I think these are actually three-dimensional results from the sound, but you're only seeing a two-dimensional cross space of it.
Right.
So you could really, in a chamber, in a sound chamber, in a vibration chamber, create these kind of patterns, these frequency patterns, which could cause the crystalline
I'm so
substance to break and reform its position. Sorry, what you're saying?
I was gonna interrupt you, Obs, for no reason. I'm
Go for
sorry.
it.
No, I was just thinking I remembered in school, like I'm so lucky I grew up like surfing and boogie boarding because I have a different perspective of a wave that I wouldn't have had from the diagrams from school because they make a wave look like this up and down thing rather than a drill that's moving forward. And that's another reason why like wave or radio electromagnetic resonance, like these ideas of resonance and perturbation really play into what shapes things are because something is reacting to any energy that's being pushed around it, and the smaller something is, the more likely it is to immediately follow that pattern, right? So following patterns in nature, that's like the whole point of nanotechnology. We're working towards biomimicry because if this works, then we should try to fall in line with it. And if it doesn't work, then it very quickly will be disintegrated by the natural processes of nature.
We're looking at a video right now of cymatics in action. It's basically he's creating vibration, which is causing matter to change shape. I mean, right now he's hitting a drum pedal and it's causing water to spiral. I'm always
Super basic.
fascinated with this. When you put this video is a bit all over the place. He's probably playing music and listening to it.
Well, the ferrofluid, though, it looks like, but is it not? Is it just patterns from water and oil?
This would be like sand on a vibrating two-dimensional platform. But you're looking at it like a sphere. You're just looking at a two-dimensional cross section of a sphere. Yeah. And then, I mean, the sphere is probably like a three-dimensional cross section of some four-dimensional inward and outward thing that our brains aren't quite built to comprehend.
I got so obsessed with doing this because I got the Moog synthesizer, right? And I've been making a bunch of like what's it called? AI based wave table signatures and physical modeling synthesis. So trying to use 3D video game engines to design how sound waves will be built. And yeah, you can do incredible stuff. I'm pretty sure that the idea of sound healing comes from this science. And I don't know, at some point also, yeah, like if you look at this pattern and compare that to the windows at Notre Dame and a lot of these different patterns that are in these early mosques and these early cathedrals, they have, when you we had this as a hypothesis, and then someone went and actually tested this by producing the tones that are played from the same climatic pattern that is produced in those stained glass window. Then you're finding the exact same tone that's used in the tuning of the pipe organs that are found in those cathedrals. So it's too weird of a coincidence that the pipe organ is tuned to make the climatic pattern of that window.
This is why. Yeah, it's actually not a coincidence. It's all specifically designed for that. I think that's what thing about metamaterials. I was talking to Jeremy Riss, the alien scientist, about metamaterials, and that's like when you have a material, but you just like carve into the material to change not the material itself, but like just structures within the material, like the structure of the material within like it, and then you'll create a pattern in the material. And I'm thinking, okay, if you could make a cymatic sound that would make that pattern, then if you make the material with that pattern, it might actually help you produce that sound frequency. And if you're trying to get a material to just cause that's where like solid state gyration, you can create like certain shapes with certain like this. If you cut that pattern into like here, I'll pause it. If you can cut that pattern into like a piece of metal, you might end up producing some sort of connection to the 4049 hertz
Right.
vibration just by having a piece of metal with that in it is the idea I was thinking about. That goes
I
two
think that
ways.
makes a lot of sense. I mean, like, so even just thinking about if you and I were to try to seed, if we were going to try to like make life or interact with life on some level, but we couldn't because it was super far away, we could use radio to hit saline solutions. So if like you hit water in the ocean or something like that, we would know for a fact that we were able to vibrate at certain resonance, that saline solution. And if we did that over and over again, we could assume that it would make some sort of a reaction the same way that this climatic pattern is reacting. And at some point, if there's something biological that occurs, I mean, either because we cause it or that it itself is following this pattern, you could have direct causal effect on what shape that thing is, what kind of life emerges. Like you could probably produce something that was a crab versus something that had, was more insectoid, or something that was more bipedal, literally with patterns that emerge. I mean, we see that already starting to happen with epigenetics. Epigenetics are the most practical response. I mean, there's lots of humans that don't have the same epigenetic responses. It has a lot to do with our circumstances in nature. So
You're saying that if you had like a tide pool with like amino acids in it and you hit it with vibrated it with certain frequencies, it would cause certain patterns of growth, which then could grow certain types of life.
and on a very general level, yes. And beyond that, I think that's why it's so interesting to study biomimicry, because if you can understand how these things caused other things to happen. I mean, this is a very interesting to me because like a lot of people talk about God versus nature. I see this as being very much about um, the 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 natural uh, the natural the natural systems themselves. I mean, the more we then the argument's the same thing, whether it's nature or God or it's us or them or whatever. Because once we understand the natural systems of things, we can reproduce them, and we already try to do that, but we get it from such a vague and big, like generalized level, that we get upset when we can't repeat a pattern in nature because we don't understand the scale, right? If we start to understand like how these things are reacting, yeah, I do think we could make really serious, effective decisions about nature, about the evolution of nature itself. Yeah.
Did Victor Schauberger, someone that you introduced me to, not literally, but his work, did he
We
do
should
things like
though. We should do some median work and meet him in spirit.
I'm
That'd be
into it,
cool.
dude. Let's come to us, Victor. Did he use vibration to impact? I know he used shape, like he would build spirals in rivers to help the water naturally clean itself because of the patterns it would take as it moved. But did he actually also pump things with vibration and watch it change?
So for the most part, what it was doing was just getting water to flow. So once water flows, because of water memory, and there's a lot of studies on water memory, that water finds memory from other water, right? So you've seen the Emoto studies and everything else like that, but the very old realistic studies that Victor Schauberger did was just putting in a swamp a machine that was really just a heavy thing that would sink, but as it would sink, water would fill it, and it would put water out the top of it, and through the process of going through the thing, it would spiral the water and it would go through these gold rivets, and it would clean the water and the copper, because the copper itself electrocutes the particles in between the copper, and so it would just kill anything that was dirty. And as the water was put back into the system, it would just constantly move the water around, and the rest of the water would learn from this water. So he did things like that. He also was involved in Minnesota and California with the log chutes. So figuring out how water could flow, because there would be places where water was going to just destroy a town. It's like, well, you can't just go around the town, because eventually the water just finds the path of least resistance. So it was interesting because here's a guy who's a mathematician and engineer, but he's also studying like Lao Tzu and the Tao, and he's applying the Tao to physics and to actual, systems of water. I mean, he did so much work that we don't really know all about because he was involved, in World War II and before World War II, because he was in Austria and Germany. So in World War II, the Germans tried to use his research for flying saucers and everything else. But he'd been part of the like the real medians, and so Maria Orsich and Schauberger had invented things like the first vacuum, the some of the earliest LED light bulbs, I think, were involved with either prophesized by Maria Orsich or first designed by Schauberger. His son also worked on a lot of these things as well. So it's not just water that Schauberger was involved with. He was straight up a guy like, you know, like Swedenborg or something like that. He was a guy who was a scientist and engineer, and near the end of his life, he's like, and by the way, I think I might have been talking to light beings. Here's this book of all the kinds of information that I got about this stuff. And it's really weird because so much of this stuff really is applicable. It's all this stuff on science.
He hasn't, unfortunately, in the mainstream, I hadn't heard of him until 3 or 4 years ago or 5 years ago. Would you classify him like on the level of Nikola Tesla?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I think he was also probably in some ways more prolific. Like in Germany and in Belgium and France, I think he's a bit more known. But yeah, I think Nikola Tesla was suppressed for a long time too. I feel like the fact that there's a car company called Tesla and things like that help us in this generation forget how suppressed Nikola Tesla was. It was really fringe to talk about Nikola Tesla. Like in the 70s, it would have been kind of weird. So
I've never heard
Schauberger's
of
one
him.
of them.
Yeah, Tesla. I grew up. I didn't hear of I didn't know he was a real person until I was like in my 20s. 19. I was
Yeah.
born in 79, so like in the late 90s, I first heard of him. I remember playing Red Alert, the video game, Command and Conquer Red Alert, and there were these things called Tesla coils. I was like, whoa, that'd be a cool thing if that existed. They would like coil and shoot electricity. And then years later, I found out this guy Nikola Tesla was a real, like, literally didn't even mention his name in public school in the 80s and 90s. It's fucking incredible.
Yeah, I got in trouble one time. I mean, I'm a Croat, so right, and it's Yugoslavia. That's like our hero. We have him on like our money and our stamps and stuff like that. But I remember in school one time, somebody was doing like a paper on like the most important inventor, and it was like Thomas Edison. And I was like in fourth grade, and I just lost it. I just started like going off, and the teacher's like, all right, just stop. Like, not that you're wrong, but just stop, because it was like, we're just not going to talk about that. Like, okay, I guess that's how this works.
So I'm looking at this cymatic thing again, and this is like what 5,907 hertz causes this pattern, and we're talking about like hitting a tide pool of amino acids with vibration to cause the life to form in the way we want it to. And I'm wondering, like, what frequency is light? It's way more than this. This is still in the sound range, but like the hertz goes up and up and up, and then at some point, like, just because it gets higher doesn't mean that the shapes don't change. It just means maybe the changes become imperceivable to the naked human eye. But like, I would imagine that the light frequency is also deciding the shape and pattern that we're behaving. Maybe just even like radiation that's passing through wall gamma rays and things like that are also, that's a bit out there.
I do think that some things are more affected by other things, right? So they're like some things are more at a higher tonality, and some things are thicker and they're affected at a lower tonality. So some things are more affected by light because they're versus like something that's affected more by sound. Like you could imagine the difference is a atomic sound cannon that's used to blow up a building versus a laser beam that can just cut right through a piece of metal. They're different, and so something might be bigger in its effect of perturbation,
and especially when used in tandem. Like if you have a vibrational sound with a vibrational light, it could cause compounding or altering effects. Like
right. I think spin state's the interesting one because people talk about gravity, which gravity is more and more just magnetism, but magnetism is really just spin state. So the more we understand about spin state, the more we understand that everything has its own frequency and harmony that's interacting. So you have maybe a cohesion based on the similarity or the dynamicism. Like there's certain things that interact literally because opposites attract, but then there's other things that are just really in a similar harmony. And so you might be more harmonized. And it seems like people do have, again, signature tonality. So
I think it's time to read some super chats. You guys, if you like what you're watching, like and subscribe to the channel because we're going to be doing a lot more of this. And of course, subscribe to Exertus on YouTube. I think it's just at Exertus at this point. Is it Andreas Exertus? You tell
Andreas Exertus is on Twitter, but Exertus is on YouTube. In general, what I want is for all of you to do like a success mantra for Ian because I love what he's doing here and it's important.
It's big time. I'm very red. That's my biggest takeaway from tonight is I look fucking red. So hopefully I can fix that for the future interviews. And
I like it.
More
I like
peach.
it. You look glowing. Yeah, peach is good though too.
Like,
I just look olive.
This off. It could be camera setting. There's a little less red. Maybe that'll help. But anyway, I'll put on some more white lights and we'll lessen the redness. We already read the super chat from earlier. Calix, hello, sir. Hello. Thank you. You are my first super chat of all time. Forever. You're the first one, dude.
Wow, that's crazy. That's awesome,
so
Calix.
much.
Look what you've done.
Who else we got? Flat range, high speed, cool guy said, "Yo, man, hope all is well. If there was a LSD jihad, would you be the caliph?" I have jihad means struggle, and I've certainly experienced struggle on LSD, if that's what you're asking. But I think there'll be people that were way more qualified to be the caliph of that than I would. But thanks for the question, man. Stefan Kalin, I hope I'm saying your name right.
Dude, we love you, Stefan. He's great. He's a good guy.
Oh, cool. Can you two design novelty? This is like a novelty thing. He's asking membership cards for the IDW intellectual dark web with all kinds of holographically layered iconography.
I do have one, actually. I have a Department of Meta-Transhumanism DMT passport. I'll make that available for you.
So what is it exactly?
God only knows. Novelty membership cards. So I don't see exactly. It's kind of, I don't want you to like, you know how Mos Def got arrested for trying to use his like Nation of Hip Hop passport in South Africa? Don't do that with this. I mean, but having a passport for DMT.
Oh, I see.
That's cool.
I'm part of the DMT. I get it.
Yeah, and it's holographic and cool. It's novelty. I like it. Souvenir.
Got another sweet super
dude.
Chat
Textbread, who runs the Tartary Nova Discord. He's the admin. We love you.
People can join the Tartary Nova Discord.
Yeah.
How do they join?
Go to tartarynova.com and then you can talk about graphene and history and stuff.
That sounds freaking awesome. Dude, we didn't even get into mud floods, ancient Atlantis. I would like to, but
we have to. I'm starting a church called X Church, which is for time travelers. We're going to save the world. It's going to be great.
Yeah, because time's not really a thing. It's just a human concept, but it's all in motion right now. So you could obviously tap into past. I would imagine you could remember past motion.
Do you think about how weird it is that like if like time is created by stars producing radiation, that anything outside of that wouldn't be affected by the things that are causing the radiation. So even if you're from a different part of the solar system, right, you wouldn't be affected by the radiation degradation of our sun. So it's just, there's so much more outside of time, just in terms of our understanding of physics.
Yeah, and even the cosmic microwave background radiation exists only within our universe, which I think is a torus. The reason why you see that red shift is not because it's getting farther away faster, but because the wavelength is bending, so it looks like it's getting longer. It's actually just bending around on itself towards the crunch where it's going to bang out. And so outside of that torus, there would be no radiation, or potentially there probably is. There's probably you're probably a torus within a torus. But I like this idea because like the further you get to this idea, right, that there's maybe like endlessness, because if something's eternal, it's even more eternal than creation or destruction. It's endlessness, right? So endlessness is, whatever that is. That's interesting. I like where you're going with that. This is from Textbread, the leader of the Discord at some point. Awesome show as always, but a really good combo for this kind of talk, Ian. Ian's always had a cool outlook on things. Hope to see more episodes in the future.
Dude,
I do too. This has actually been very, very
the future of Ian is bright. That's great.
Dude, the future Ian. Oh, another one from Stefan Callan. We got graphite and diamond have melting points. Carbon doesn't.
Well, yeah, depends on what you mean. I think arguably everything does. Like, I don't really believe in an impossibility.
This is just because like a carbon atom isn't matter. It's not like a solid, liquid, or gas. It's not a solid. It's just an atom. So
yeah, like it's like, can you take apart at a certain point? You would shatter carbon into another material. That's like really what you get. But that's still cool. I like it.
Dude, the Indian Jesus, who I love. Thank you, Indian Jesus. Says super sticker. Does that mean it is a super sticker, or does that?
Oh, that must have been. There must have been a super sticker, but we can't see it on YouTube.
Okay.
It's probably a really cool sticker.
I'll have to go
Unless
back
it
and
was racist, in which case, come on, man. But I hope it wasn't. I hope it was a cool
yeah,
sticker.
much love. Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
Triton 54, Borafine is where it's at. Combining graphene with the utilities of transistors and PNP junctions. I'm not familiar. Do you know what those PNP junctions are?
PNP. No. I mean, do you mean plug in and play? I don't know. PNP
The
junctions.
Borafine is really, you're tapping into those benzene rings. So it's just a hexagonal lattice of boron instead of carbon. And they have found fascinating. I don't know too much about it, but they found that has properties.
Nano physical, like PMPA rubric, if that's what you mean. Yeah, please explain to me, Trey, and I want to know what you're saying. I do love boron and borosine. I like the idea of what's it called? The sodium borite. What's like the glass? Pyrex. Pyrex is one of the first things that really show, because you can, a normal glass will shatter with hyper radiation, but because of the structural integrity of the boron ring, you're able to hold it together. So it's another reason why certain kinds of borphenic or borazine ceramics are really practical, because these things that can kind of heal themselves when they bend. I think that's really that's what we're looking for.
I just read that they've found that metal heals itself at the nanoscale. They're finding like they'll pull it apart really fast and cause like tension fractures, and then they'll watch it heal. They actually called it healing.
Yeah, there's questions about just what kind of structural integrity you get when you and also if it's pure metal, it's different. If you've got some sort of any amount of stoichiometric in impurity, then that can cause other materials to start to make it impossible for things to heal properly. But in general, a pure material, it makes you wonder, like, what is it again to be solid and liquid? Or when you're a pure material. That's the thing about this nanotechnology. A lot of it's pure material.
Yeah, I was thinking, what does it even mean to be metal? Like iron and silver are completely different things. To call them both metal is almost like a dumb ancient misnomer that we're going to figure out.
I'm going to send you a thing, actually. I got a pretty good thing on like nano definitions on glasses, ceramics, metals. And it is interesting because it's not what you would think metal would be defined as. There's a lot of things that you're like, oh, I guess that's a metal, like that's a salt, but it's a metal,
We got Rockstar Podcast with the Go Live More.
Sweet.
That's what I'm talking about, dude.
Everything
about
alive.
that I love.
Be live.
What a great day. I was like, Andreas, I typed to Andreas before we got started, do you want to live or no? But the way it looks is, do you want to live or no?
It was a pretty good attempting. It was like Steve Jobs trying to get me to save my own life. I was like, yeah, all right.
So thanks for going live. Here we got Carrington Cox. Ian, everyone deserves a friend like you, bro. Yo, dude, I love your profile picture, man. Thank you. Yes.
Dude, everyone. I don't know if everyone deserves a friend like you, but I am blessed to have a friend like you. I'll tell you that.
Be the friend you want.
Yeah.
And then you'll find those people. You will. Insight of the Ages. I would love to chat with Ian about my SpaceX kombucha vision.
We got to do that at some point. I know this guy. He's kind of interesting, actually. He made this crazy kombucha that was like not supposed to be that weird, but he like blasted off while working at SpaceX on a normal kombucha that went too far. I forget if it was like agave based or something, but yeah.
Wow. Well, there's fungus involved with that, so my ears are perked.
He's in the Tartar Nova Discord as well, Inside of the Ages.
He went on to say, so much of his ramblings, talking about my ramblings, align with yours, with mine. Glad to be on the planet with y'all. Well, I'm glad to be on the planet with you, man. I feel a lot less alone when I know there's other people that dig this kind of shit.
Yeah, even if we're just on the back of a giant turtle, it's great, dude. Even Keenan, too. These are all my people. What's up, Keenan?
Keenan Smith bringing it home. Bring Steven back to the sink tank. Misses energy.
Do you mean Stefan?
Stefan looks like,
or a different Steven? I don't know which one you mean. Keenan, let me know if you mean Stefan. Stefan and I are supposed to do an episode. He hits me up and I'll be like sleepy. I can't believe I did this. Ian had to twist my arm.
Yeah, it was late. But Andreas pulls through. What's the sink tank?
Sink Tank on Tuesdays, I do a show that's about synchronicity research. We've got David Plate, who's like MK Ultrasound, Paranoid American, Thomas Gorans, who makes like the greatest comic books. I don't know if you've seen Paranoid American, but he does chick tracks about MK Ultra. They're just I can't even sell it enough. Yeah, Sink Tank's a great show.
Dude, I've been thinking about you said synchronicity made me think of synergy. And I was like, what is synergy? We looked it up. Synergy is when two forces come together to create a result that is greater than the sum of their parts.
Yeah.
that's like two people having a conversation. It's like two people lifting a table. Like you can lift more than double the weight when two
Totally.
people are
Symbiotes,
powerful.
I think that's the thing that really is. It's an interesting thing because we focus on parasitical issues in society. We don't think about symbiosis enough, and there's a lot of symbiosis that really, like, the most of the world is symbiotic. Like, that's basically complexity of structure is more symbiosis, and that's alchemy. Like you kind of said, more energy. It doesn't mathematically make sense how much more energy seems to be produced by it. It's great.
And like pulsing sound and vibration in rapid succession can cause synergistic results, especially because if time's not real and it's really just about motion, then if you're pushing over and over again, like what kind of shape is that making?
Right.
Triton 54, hitting it hard. Boron is used to dope semiconductors and create microchips interlaced with graphene, basic transistor theory.
Yeah. Boron's great.
Cool. So what if you took a layer of twistronic graphene, and then a layer of borphine, and then a layer of graphene, and a layer of borphine, or a layer of graphene, borphine. You can figure out some combination of benzene layers to create the ultimate conductivity. Maybe there's something there.
I can't wait to see pure conductivity. I think that's where we're getting to. We're getting to a phase very soon where we're going to see like pure conductivity, which is just, it's important to remember, like 50, 60 years ago, we thought we had to have like pure metals to do like really large amounts of them to do any of these things. Really, all we're trying to do is just figure out how we can have like the smallest thing that does it. And when we get down to it, we find that it's not necessarily the material. That can help, but it's more the structure that material teaches us about, and then we can do that with even cheaper stuff. Right? Same thing every time.
John Beert says, "Keep rolling 20s, friends."
Yeah, bro.
That's what's all about.
We love you, John.
I will.
This is great. These are all beautiful people, by the way. Wonderful people that are in your audience right now.
The Indian Jesus with another $2 super sticker. Well, I mean, another super sticker. This one was $2. Thanks, dude. I didn't see the sticker because I'm in StreamYard.
I'm gonna check them later. They're probably really cool.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think this is it for the night. Andreas Exertus.
Dude, thanks
coming
for having
in hot with the big data, dude. And we will do this again.
Yes, dude. And if you find the little magnet fridge that looks like me, let me know. I missed that guy.
Oh, yeah, I will. So people are going to be looking for you on the internet, subscribing to your YouTube channel at Exertus. Can you shout out, point them to the right link?
Dude, well, guys, you can watch Sync Tank on Tuesdays, and you can watch Wednesday Ultra on Wednesdays. But go to Exertus, Xirtus. Exertus is on YouTube, and Andreas Exertus is on Twitter. I'm friends with Ian. You can find me there. He follows me.
As for me, follow me on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, like the video, follow me on X and Minds, follow me on Instagram, anywhere at Ian Crossland. We will be doing this a lot more. Come back tomorrow at 3:30. It's actually come back later today, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm going to be interviewing James Tour from Rice University. He's one of the pioneering leading graphene chemists on Earth. He and one of his students, Dewey Long, Dewey invented the process of flash Joule graphene. He figured it out in the lab, and James has really popularized it. It's where they take carbon of some sort and hit it with lasers. They pulse it and turn it into graphene with as far as I can tell, a hydrogen byproduct. And apparently they can create, for every kilogram of hydrogen fuel they create out of this, they get $4.50 worth of graphene byproducts. So it's actually profitable to create hydrogen fuel with this technology. I think it can be revolutionize Earth, revolutionize our economy. It's not about the dollars that are getting printed. It's about the things we are producing, the gross domestic product. And if we can start producing hydrogen and graphene together, I want to make it popular. So thanks again, Andreas. Thank you always, Exertus. And I'll see you guys tomorrow.